I'm really delighted to be sharing this practice with you this morning. I'm very excited, um, both for the process of sharing it with you and for the possibility of what you might experience as you practice it on your own. So the Maranatha practice. I want to begin by just telling you a story some of you have heard before. In 1957, there was a group of Buddhist monks that were moving a monastery from one part of Thailand to another. And in the course of the move, they had to move a very, very large, what seemed like a ceramic statue of the Buddha. It was very, very old. So they were being careful with it as they tried to move it. But one of the monks noticed there was a large crack in the ceramic portion of the back. And upon further investigation, he looked down into it, and there seemed to be a gold light gleaming back at him. And he took a hammer and chisel and began chiseling away the ceramic, the clay. And lo and behold, the Buddha was actually made of gold. This is a true story. And historians believe that several hundred years before, a group of monks were going to be attacked by the Burmese army. And so they covered this gold statue with mud, with clay, with ceramic, in order to protect it and keep it from being stolen, run off with. So during that attack, all the monks that knew about this gold were killed. And it wasn't until 1957 that it was discovered that this statue is actually made of gold. So I don't have to go too far with the application. I'm sure you get it. We are gold. Our essence, our core is gold. And yes, there is seemingly quite a bit of mud over that gold essence. And we're in the process of cleaning that mud off, of collaborating with divine grace to clear out that mud so that we can discover our gold essence, our divine core, our divine self, and live from that, not only for ourselves, but for the world. Imagine that, even a quarter of the world's population could discover that divine core in themselves and live from that in the world. Well, that's where we're headed, I believe, as a species. And you and I are on the front, the kind of the leading edge of that. The fact that you're even here, that you're even interested in having such a discussion with me and learning such a practice and trying it out, indicates that that gold is active in you, that inner essence is active in you and wanting to come online more and more and more in your life for your own benefit, and the benefit of your family, and the benefit of your neighborhood, and for the benefit of all beings. So this practice is based upon an understanding, and all of you have been with me, and I'll just share this briefly. It's the understanding that the universe is a multitudinous expression of a single consciousness. And that consciousness, we can use the word, dreamed existence into being. And it wasn't that the creator created its creation and then wandered away and let creation just spin out its destiny. It's the dreamer, just like when you're dreaming, your consciousness is manifesting as every aspect of the dream, right? So the divine dreamer dreams existence, manifestation into being, and inhabits it. There is what is sometimes referred to as a spark of the divine in the heart of all beings, in the heart of everything that is an expression of life. There is a spark of the divine at the core of that. That's the gold core. That's the gold self that we were referring to a moment ago. So that's already present. We don't have to cultivate it. We just have to chip the mud away. And so that's what spiritual practices are all about. Spiritual practices are about sloughing the mud. Now, on the spiritual path, that's called purification. There is this understanding that as we grow along, as consciousness slowly wakes up to its true nature through the many, many lifetimes, there are many things that are done to us and things that we do to others, and that result in really negative karma in a thick layer of mud. And the light, the glimmer of the gold can't be seen through the density of that mud that develops in the personality and expresses lifetime after lifetime in the personality. It expresses as complete, like the opposite of what the gold is. So the gold, for instance, is just is preciousness, it's vibrance, it's aliveness, it's inherent worth and value. But the mud may say, I'm worthless and discardable, I'm not lovable, I'm leavable. That mud is a karmic pattern, something that the mind has learned through some experience along the line, and it's become a way of that the mind thinks of itself, a story that the mind tells. And these stories that the mind tells, if they do not reflect the truth of the inner core, they will produce suffering for us. And every time we think them, speak them, act them, the mud becomes just a tiny bit denser or thicker. So we need spiritual practices to penetrate through this mud, to glimpse our true nature, and to stay engaged in collaborating with grace to chip slowly away at these karmic patterns and some scars and unresolved business of our life, unfinished business of our life, so that we can be come to know and to radiate our true nature, that divine core, that divine self. Now, there's lots of different words for that divine self. I like the word self, used that for many years. That actually comes from the Vedanta tradition, self with a capital S. It's the one self of all beings. That's that inner core. I also like the word Christ consciousness, because in Christianity, in mystical Christianity, it was very much understood that the spirit, the divine spirit, the Christ, inhabited Jesus and manifested through him in a way that was unimpeded by his ego. His ego sloughed away, the mud sloughed away, and he only lived from that gold. And in that tradition, in mystical Christianity, that's called Christ consciousness. In Buddhism, it's just simply called our Buddha nature. You can imagine the nature of the Buddha, if you've studied the Buddha's life and teachings, phenomenal being that just changed the world by his very presence, because he woke up to the gold within and all the mud sloughed away, right? So it's called, in that tradition, it's called Buddha nature. It doesn't matter what you call it. It is beyond all names. It remains a mystery. We never figure it out. We never control it in any way. We only learn to give ourselves to it. The personality learns to open and surrender to it and to let it come forth more and more. Now, the Maranatha practice is just a really lovely and very powerful practice to invoke the coming forth of that inner divine self, the shining forth through the mud of that gold core. That's what the Maranatha practice is. The word Maranatha actually originates in the Greek, and it was used in the Bible, in the New Testament Bible, by Paul at the end of the letter to the Corinthians, Maranatha. And the word means, come, O Lord. Come, O Lord. And of course, for the early Christians, they would say Maranatha, hoping for the second return of Jesus that had been prophesied. But I want you to understand that mystics have been using this word for now several thousand years in a different way, anticipating the coming of Christ consciousness, which is the descent of our higher nature into the personality. so that we can live in the world in a very different way, live in a world in a very different way than from our egos, from our um, scared, separate selves that go reactive at the slightest provocation and act in self-serving, self-protective ways and end up creating a lot of suffering for ourselves and for others. The world's condition now is very much a result of our living as a species from the ego, from a sense of a separate self, and the separate self only caring for itself, me and mine, you know? So there is an evolution taking place. I am absolutely convinced of it, and I can see it, and so can you if we can look through the eyes of our hearts. It is a warming up of that inner glow. People are beginning to care in larger and larger scales, you know, as has been evidenced here in just really the last month, you know, around the George Floyd um, incident and the protests. And now this understanding that we must treat each other with equality. We must bring justice and equality to all beings, no matter what skin color or socioeconomic background or racial background or whatever it is, all beings. There is this, though maybe it's not like spoken in this kind of format, but there is this growing understanding that we are all gold at the core. It doesn't matter what the mud exterior looks like. We are all gold at the core, every one of us. And every one of us deserves to be treated as though that is the truth. And so we're moving in the direction, I believe, as a species, to a greater awakening, a greater understanding that we are indeed gold at the core. And how can we more fully and completely embody that and live that in the world with one another on a global scale? How can we do that? So it requires the activation of this inner divine self, this Christ consciousness, this Buddha nature in us. It requires the activation of that, the discovery of it, allowing it to manifest in our lives and through our lives. And that is exactly what the Maranatha practice is all about. Every time we say Maranatha, it's an invocation for that divine self to shine forth. It's an invocation for the divine self in its grace and power to, from within, from the inside out, slough the mud that blocks the full expression of divine truth and love and power. Maranatha, come, O Lord. The Lord that Maranatha refers to is not a person. It's our own higher nature. It's our own divine self. It's our own gold. Come, O Lord, come forth. And we can think of that as come down, right? The descending Christ consciousness. We can think of it like that because it's coming, quotes, down from higher consciousness, not from an outer place somewhere. We often think of ourselves as a body, and so anything beyond the skin we think as being outside of ourselves. But actually, we are magnificent beings. And when we talk about the descending light of spirit, or the descending Christ consciousness, descent just simply means from higher consciousness, from our own connection to higher consciousness down into the personality self. The personality self being the physical, emotional, and mental bodies. So we can think of it as Christ consciousness descending, or we can think of it as our Buddha nature coming forth from deep within, from our core, the deepest aspect of our being beginning to kind of rumble forth. I have a favorite metaphor of a meadow, and there is a tiny dandelion growing at the center of that meadow, and the dandelion thinks, "This is my meadow. It's all mine, and I'm like sovereign in this meadow." And one day he begins to feel kind of a rumbling underneath him and kind of a movement that left him feeling rather unsettled. And so he clenched his roots. I'm holding my ground here. But as the days went by, things began to shift, and something that he could not control came up from underneath, and it was the seedling of a sequoia. And that seedling, as it came up, just completely uprooted and supplanted the little dandelion. The little dandelion is the ego, of course, and the sequoia is our true nature. And it is coming forth individually and collectively. I hope you can see that. And often it comes forth, and as the sequoia grows up, the dandelion feels quite threatened and quite overwhelmed and quite scared and says, oh, this is the end of the world. Well, it is the end of that world, the dandelion dominated world, but it's the beginning of the sequoia dominated world. So in our last satsang, we talked about the metamorphosis of the caterpillar into the butterfly, right? And how in the chrysalis, the caterpillar liquefies, completely it just come right down to its essence. It liquefies, it comes undone, so that it can be remade and come out the other side a butterfly. So I believe that in Earth's history, we're in a chrysalis period where the old style, the old center of operations, the ego, is being liquefied, is being seen as the source of our suffering, so that we can make a shift to orienting from our souls, to orienting from love and from harmony and from equality and from peace in the world. So Maranatha is the invocation to the coming forth of the inner sequoia. Keep using these different metaphors. The inner gold. Come, Lord, come forth in me, says the personality to its higher self. So it's very important to me that if you've learned about Maranatha from a different tradition, say Christian tradition, that you let go best you can of any associations with a certain tradition, because this mantra, Maranatha, has the power to go deep into the being and to bring forth the mystery of the divine presence in you. And it's really helpful to let go of whatever associations you might have with a certain tradition, which may in fact limit your understanding and limit the power of the practice. It's helpful to look at it like this, another metaphor. I love stained glass. And I love going into buildings that have stained glass, churches, temples, buildings, whatever. We have a lovely, by the way, here in Chico, a lovely stained glass shop. If you go in, there's beautiful stained glass lamps, and it's just quite lovely. I happen to love stained glass. So let's say that in a temple or a church, there's this beautiful mosaic of stained glass, and the sun shines through it, right? And each pane of glass, say a red pane as opposed to a blue pane or a yellow pane, those panes of glass condition the light coming through so that the light on the other side of the glass is red or is blue or is yellow. This is what belief systems and organized religion has done to the light of divine wisdom, truth, and love. It's conditioned it. I'm not saying that's bad. It's necessary when the light comes through a human being, to the whatever extent that human being has an ego, that light is going to be conditioned. So for instance, in the Christian tradition, the light comes pretty unconditioned through Jesus because he doesn't have much of an ego, any at all, I would say. So the light shines through in its brilliance. But in subsequent generations, all the trappings around his teachings were very much conditioned by ego because men and women didn't have the evolution he had. So the light began to come through in very colored ways, blue, yellow, orange, whatever it might be. Now, again, we're not saying this is wrong and bad. It's just helpful to remember that the light coming through the stained glass and conditioned by the stained glass is not exactly the same as the light in its origin, the sun itself. Right? The sun itself is not in any way conditioned by the glass. It's not touched. It doesn't even know about the glass. It's not worried about the glass. So I'm hoping for you to understand that when we use the word Maranatha, we're invoking the sun itself, a ray of which is already established as your essence and core. So we want to understand that it's the sun itself in its origin that we're invoking with Maranatha, and not an idea, not a concept, not an overlay, not a doctrine, not this as opposed to that. So when I use the word Christ consciousness or Buddha nature, I am referring to that sun. Again, a ray of which is your essence and core. And it is that you invoke and invite forth in your life when you say Maranatha. All right, I hope that's clear. If we were in an auditorium, I'd stop and say, okay, do you have questions? And I'd really like you to be able to, if you have a question and you want clarification, it's very important to me that I'm as clear as possible with this practice, so that you can take it home when we're done here and really find its power, as I have been so blessed by it. So if you have a question or you need some clarification, please type it in the little chat box, and I'll do my best to answer, to notice that and to answer whatever questions you have. Okay, so then let's look at how this Maranatha practice works. What I hope to accomplish today with you, and we have another hour to do it, is I want to go through the basic understanding of what the practice is. I want to go through the practice itself, and I want to show you how to apply the practice in these three different contexts: the personal, the interpersonal, and the transpersonal. First of all, just understand there is a dual intention when we do the Maranatha practice. And so I'll read it to you here. It's on your screen. I hope you can see that. The first is more of a personal intention to invite and invoke the higher self into every aspect of one's being for the deepest purification, the most extensive transformation, and the most powerful and permanent liberation, a complete supplanting of the suffering separate self with the higher self. All right, that's the first intention. So it's very helpful for you to kind of memorize these intentions, but really get clear on these intentions, because as you say them and these intentions light up inside of you, it makes the practice all the more powerful and real, palpable in your life. The second intention, to invite and invoke the higher self into every aspect of planetary life, into all levels and forms of consciousness, into every process, structure, and interaction, every entity, organization, and nation, in order for the kingdom of heaven, of truth, of love, and harmony to be established on earth. So the Maranatha practice is much bigger than what we want to do just for ourselves. It certainly begins with that. That's a key component of it, but it spreads out into a concern for and a saying, doing the practice on behalf of the world at large. And that is because our Buddha nature, or Christ consciousness, this indwelling divinity, is the indwelling divinity of all beings. So it's not only interested in Scott. It definitely is interested in the development of the Scott consciousness, to come to resonate and realize its true nature. It's definitely interested in that, but it's also just as interested in the growth in one's realization of everyone on the planet. So as we grow in this practice, we see that it has power to transform our own individual lives, and also we use it to be of service on a planetary level, on a global level. This is very important as we grow into the Christ self, just using all these different words. As we grow into the higher self, there is a deepening a growing uh, um, urgency to be of service to the world. And we see with clearer eyes the suffering in the world. We understand it more fully because we are understanding what creates suffering in our own lives. And we want to be of service in some kind of way to the people around us, recognizing the people around us as expressions of the same spirit that we are expressions of. They are literally extensions and expressions of ourself, of our higher self. So those are the two intentions, and I invite you to read these over every time you do your mantra practice with Maranatha. Every time you use Maranatha and you do the Maranatha practice, I invite you to read these. Now, these, because I can't hand them out to you, uh, this understanding and a little more of the write-up about the Maranatha practice is on my website, scottwyman.com. And you can go to that website and it will have a tab there for the Maranatha practice. And it will have these instructions. It'll have the everything that you see here, in addition to kind of a short description of the Maranatha practice, why we're doing it. All right, so then let's look at the basic practice. And again, I'm pausing now and again to give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So the basic practice goes like this. It's a meditative practice, right? So you'll find a place to sit and you'll tune inward and you'll take a nice deep breath and you'll relax the body and you'll sit up nice and straight, etc. So then the idea is to fully inhabit your experience. What does that mean? When you inhabit your house, you live in it, you explore it. You don't identify with it. You don't say, I am this physical structure, but you inhabit it. I want you to inhabit your experience. Let's say, for instance, that you've got a little anxiety going on because of what's going on in the world. Then I want you to absolutely inhabit that anxiety. Remember, inhabit, not become, not identify with. So inhabit means to name it, feel it fully, explore it, but don't identify with it. Don't become it. Don't get lost in the drama of it. Now, this is a very important skill. I work with you in this skill on just about every practice that I share with you. This is one of the ways that we get in touch with our mud and that we help to kind of chip it away, that we collaborate with divine grace in the chipping away of it. We have to bring the brilliant light of our attention to it. The light of our awareness is what we invoke when we say Maranatha. The light of our awareness is the inner presence, the inner divine presence. So when we look at something very, very intently, it's that intensity is actually coming from the higher self. And it has a healing effect on what we're looking at. So of course, as you understand, from an ego's perspective, when something arises that's uncomfortable, we want to quickly turn away from it. I don't, I'd grab something to eat, turn on the TV, go do something, distract, whatever. So this is the exact opposite. Here we bring awareness to what we're experiencing. So fully inhabit your experience. If it's anxiety, if it's restlessness, if it's resistance, if it's reactivity in something that's happened in your relationship or your reactivity to the world, your fear about your physical well-being with COVID, etc., whatever it happens to be. And it doesn't have to be just something that's kind of negative. If you sit down and you're feeling some gratitude for life and some peace, inhabit that. That's a super thing to inhabit. So the first part of the practice, a very important part of the practice, is really let yourself sit down into your emotional experience. not just your emotional, but I want you to make sure you feel the emotional component of your experience. Again, name it, feel it fully, explore it, don't identify with it. Now, the second thing is say Maranatha to invoke your higher self into that experience. We're not saying Maranatha in the hopes that the higher self will kind of helicopter down and pull us out of that experience and out and away and we can like be free of it. And that's not what this is about at all. This is about the coming forth of the higher self into that experience. We want that experience because it's rooted in untruth. We want that experience to be touched by divine truth and grace and love and power, to transmute it right from the inside out. Our practices, as you know, as we hang out together, our practices are not to escape the world, but to discover the descending light of spirit and to anchor that down into the world. Not to escape human drama, but to discover the divine core in ourself and to manifest that within human drama. That's what our practices are about. And that's what this Maranatha practice is really helping you to cultivate. So you say Maranatha, which is an invocation for the higher self, for Christ consciousness, for our Buddha nature. You say Maranatha as you're in the middle of, let's just say, anxiety, since that's pretty ubiquitous right now on the planet. You feel your anxiety and you say Maranatha to invoke that higher consciousness into the anxiety. Then the third step is to be receptive, open to what responds to your invocation. Now this takes a little time to develop. Oftentimes we don't know how to be receptive. We might have prayed, for instance, all our life, but we don't know how to be receptive to how divine consciousness responds to our prayers. We don't know how to open ourselves and allow the descent of grace into our lives. This is a skill, very important skill. So we'll practice this as we do this in a moment, but just several examples of ways to experience this is one, to visualize light coming in from behind the heart center. Love to feel the light coming in from behind the soul light coming in from behind the heart center, or from above the head, the descending light of spirit in through the head, or feel that something is responding from deep within you. The rumbling of that internal sequoia. So this is a very important part of the practice. You inhabit your experience. You begin to say Maranatha, just in a very kind of slow repetition. And you really cultivate a growing sensitivity to the subtle ways in which the mantra invokes spirit in your felt experience of that moment. Let me read. Do you only use Maranatha invocation when in meditation or in daily life also when you're feeling something difficult? You are ahead of me. That's beautiful. Yes, we're going to see in these contexts, the interpersonal and the transpersonal, that the Maranatha invocation is meant to be made on behalf of others and on behalf of the world. So absolutely yes, and we'll get there. Thank you so much for that question. Right now, we're just working on the first context, which is getting familiar with the practice in a personal context, just working with it kind of inside of ourselves. It's a wonderful question. Thank you. All right, so then we cultivate surrender, acceptance, and trust. These are three very important qualities on the spiritual path. They make the little acronym SAT. Surrender, acceptance, and trust. That this moment's experience, exactly as it is an opportunity for healing and awakening. and that grace is responding whether or not you can feel it in the moment. So this is a very important cultivation. Oftentimes, people that I've shared this practice with begin to have, and kind of like very quickly have, palpable experiences, kind of responses. That's not always the way it works. It's very important that you aren't attached to a certain outcome when you do a spiritual practice. So this part of the practice is to be patient and to cultivate surrender, acceptance, and trust. The surrender of the personality to the higher self. The acceptance of how things are, exactly as they are, and the trust that they are as they are for our highest good and the highest good of all beings. That's surrender, acceptance, and trust. And that we sometimes have to recycle that understanding as we're in the practice, because as we'll talk about in a moment, the practice doesn't always immediately lift your anxiety or bring about peace of mind. Doesn't always do that. And there are reasons for that. So that's a very important point, to cultivate surrender, acceptance, and trust. Then we practice perceiving all the ways that your higher self is now manifesting as a result of your invocation. Maranatha, 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 Maranatha. I say this to you when I teach mantra as well. It is impossible for you to say Maranatha and for there not to be a profound response. It is impossible. Now, it's very possible, and even sometimes probable, that you can say Maranatha and not be tuned into how your higher self responds. We may not be aware of how the higher self responds. The higher self may be responding in dimensions of ourself that we're not consciously aware of. But it is impossible to say Maranatha and not have a response. So then this part of the practice, this practice of perceiving all the ways the higher self is showing up, is a really beautiful way for you to teach the mind to attune to the reality of divine spirit in your life, the reality of your higher self that's already in full operation in your life. Unfortunately, the mind often dominates and points awareness at all the troubles in our life, or all the ways that we've been victimized, or all the problems that we have, or all the problems in the world, and stays fixated on these kinds of things, right? So then we're not aware of the very subtle ways in which our higher self is trying to get our attention, trying to manifest in our life, trying to help us to raise our consciousness above the vibration of fear and shame and guilt and so forth. So here are some examples of the way in which, the subtle ways in which the higher self begins to show up as you invoke your higher consciousness through the mantra Maranatha, and you're sitting in this meditation, continuing to say the mantra. Then it begins to show up as a subtle calm kind of beginning to steal over you, or it has maybe a quieting effect, right? Maybe the mind isn't running around in circles quite so much and is kind of sat down somewhere. An increasing sense of light at the core of your being, feeling more centered, more peaceful, more fully present. That's a really helpful one for you to understand. And people don't appreciate that as actually a manifestation of their higher self. For you to feel more present and engaged in the moment and centered and grounded is actually a wonderful indication that you are attuning or aligning with your soul. Let's see, more fully present, more insight, more inspiration. And then the next one is very important, going deeper into the uncomfortable experience. So sometimes, as I am practicing this in myself, when I say Maranatha, there isn't an immediate light or calm or peace. Instead, it feels like there's an intensification of whatever it is I'm sitting in. We just keep using the word anxiety. So let's say I'm sitting in anxiety and I'm saying Maranatha, and it only feels like the anxiety is getting more intense, it's not lightening up. This is actually an indication of your higher self intervening on your behalf. It's helping you to become more fully the investigator, the inquirer of this state of consciousness. It's been said that you cannot transcend what you do not understand. So there are states of consciousness that are very important for you to go more deeply into. Let's say, for instance, as an example, you're in a lot of anger. And and the anger doesn't just simply give way. Now, sometimes it may when you say Maranatha, but it may not just simply give way. And if it doesn't give way, it's often because you're being asked to go deeper into the anger to see what else is there. Anger is often a cover for more vulnerable feelings. Anger feels powerful. So it's often a cover for more vulnerable feelings. So then the guidance of your higher self is to go more deeply into anger until you discover the more vulnerable feelings underneath it. So if when you said Maranatha, your anger just went poof, then there would be no invitation, no recognition of what your anger is actually, how it functions in your life and what it's hiding. The more vulnerable feelings of feeling hurt or uncared for, unseen, unheard. So we want to be able to explore this. And so sometimes the way that your higher self manifests is by taking you by the hand, so to speak, and guiding you deeper into your process. Very, very important. Another manifestation of your higher self is an increasingly keen awareness. Awareness, of course, is the nature of the higher self. Awareness and love, I would say, are the two kind of main characteristics of your higher self. Pure, universal, clear, awake awareness, and this unconditional love for all beings. So very often our awareness is obscured by lots and lots of thinking and obsessional stories and lots of projections and running around trying to come up with interpretations of what's happening. All that kind of mental activity often obscures the purity of our awake awareness. So what you'll notice as you do the Maranatha practice, that there is this kind of a clearing out of all the mental activity, and you'll sit in this very clear awake awareness, right? And that awareness doesn't necessarily have to be awareness of something. It could be just aware of being aware, of sitting, abiding in and as awareness. This is one of the great gifts of the Maranatha practice. Patience, which is really helpful. Sometimes that is exactly what we are being asked in these difficult situations to cultivate, a greater sense of patience, a growing perseverance, and of course, compassion for self and others. So as subtle as any of these may be, they are manifestations, they are responses of your higher self, of your own Buddha nature. They are responses of that to your invocation, Maranatha, Maranatha, Maranatha. And then the last part of the practice is shift your identity. We want to shift your identity from the one who is struggling with anxiety to what is responding, what is coming as a result, the greater peace, the greater light, the greater calm. So the saying here is, what I want you to try as you're doing this is, I am what I'm invoking. I am what I'm invoking. This light that seems to be growing in my chest as I say Maranatha, that's what I am. This peace that seems to be stealing over me, in spite of the fact that nothing in the outer world has changed, that's what I am. this greater clarity of awareness and insight, that is what I am, right? It's not just something happening to me, it's what I am. This is a very important part of the practice because our tendency is to be identified as the dude sitting in the chair struggling with anxiety, using practices to feel better. That's usually what we're identifying with. And we're wanting to let go of that identity and shift into a greater sense of, what I am is this higher nature that is beginning to reveal itself to me and intervene on behalf of my personality through the Maranatha practice. That's what I am. So those are the steps that we go through. We're about to do it here in just a moment. Let me read. Can the practice help me see more deeply into our inability to converse and find reconciliation? That is exactly correct. And that's why I want to make sure that you understand that sometimes the practice takes us deeper into the discomfort rather than immediately taking the discomfort away. We have to explore more deeply into what's gotten reactive here, right? Have to explore more deeply into the inner chaos that gets projected out into the outer world, right? Our reactivity to people and things. We may have a deep intention to be the energy of love, and then we read a Facebook post and the top of our head blows off with anger and resentment, and that we stew on that for the rest of the day. What in the world is that about if I wanted to be the energy of love? Well, if we invoke Maranatha, then we're going to be guided down more deeply into the internal system that needs to be saturated with truth, with wisdom, with deep understanding, with inspiration, right? There's a great humility that the Maranatha practice cultivates in us, a humility to be able to say, everything that I see in the outer world, everything that I criticize everybody else for doing, I can find that in myself. All forms of injustice and racism and prejudice, I can find that in myself. All reactivity, all arrogance, all spiritual ego, I can find that in myself. Whatever you can find, whatever you react to on a Facebook post or watching the news or whatever you hear in the outer world, I can find that in myself. It's a great humility that the Maranatha practice, really any spiritual practice, really opens up. And a willingness to go deeper in. And the deeper we go, the more we just keep invoking Maranatha. Into this depth now, my higher self, I invite you. Into this depth, into this discovery, into this anger, into this reactivity. I used to have a saying, and I've shared it with some of you. It was a prayer that I used to pray. Into this me, I invite thee. Into this me, this version of Scott that's right here, right now, the angry version, the scared version, the reactive version, the puffed up version, the arrogant version, this version, this state of mind that I'm in right now, into this me, I invite thee. And that is exactly what happens when we say Maranatha. Maranatha is an invitation of divine wisdom, love, and power into what we're discovering in ourselves. The muck and mess, the mud, Maranatha invokes the light of spirit into the darkness of our shadow, all of our unresolved karmas, all of our unfinished business. Let me read. Reminds me of a story. A man is drowning. He prays to God for help. God sends a person to help, but the man says he's waiting for God to help him. Yes. God sends a boat to help, but the man says no. He's waiting for God to help him. Yes, you get the point. When the man dies, he asks God why he didn't help him. God explains all the ways that they tried to help, all the ways that God was trying to help through all these different interventions. Yes, beautiful. Beautiful. All right, so at this point, so we don't run out of time, I want to do the practice with you. And this part of the practice will be just the personal part. Then we'll stop and at least I think that's how we'll do it. Maybe we'll move into the interpersonal. I'll see how we're doing with time. So let's get quiet. Let's sit up nice and straight and hold the intention to not only be introduced to, but to be nurtured by, healed and enlightened by the Maranatha practice. So settle into yourself and find in yourself just whatever is there to experience. In other words, step one, inhabit your experience. What is this moment like for me? And notice that there's layers to it. What I'm experiencing right at the surface might be a little different than what I'm experiencing as I drop down into a little deeper depth. Like maybe, for instance, this morning's okay. And yet deeper in, there's this kind of baseline anxiety, just as an example. Inhabit the experience. In other words, it's helpful to name it. As soon as we name it, that helps us to disidentify with it. When we name it, it becomes a pattern to watch, to explore, rather than what we are. And you don't have to call it my this or my that. It's not necessarily to personalize it. Just notice, oh, this is anxiety. This is a sense of excitement. This is a sense of pessimism. This is resistance. This is fatigue. This is confusion. This is depression. This is reactivity. This is anger. Name it, feel it fully, just as it is. Don't try to change it or make it go away. Explore it. Be curious about it. To inhabit it means to go into it, as you would go into a house. The house isn't what you are, but you go into it and explore it. Don't create an identity out of it. Now, while being right there in that experience, begin just to very gently say, and it can just be internally, Maranatha, Maranatha. Knowing that you are invoking your higher self and inviting it into this experience. Maranatha. And as you say it, make yourself receptive, completely open. To the response of your higher self, which is certain. And just notice any of the subtle ways in which your experience shifts, or anything else that kind of seeps into your experience as you continue to say the mantra. No attachment to any form or certain kind of response, but just notice the subtle ways in which things may be shifting as you say Maranatha and invoke the profound mystery of your own higher nature into your felt experience. Maranatha, come divine presence, higher self, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature. Just noticing the subtle ways in which your experience morphs, changes. When the mind wanders, which it will, of course, this is meditation, just come back to the mantra, Maranatha. If you have an affinity to a great being, think that you're invoking the spirit of that being, and that spirit of that being is coming forth in you, like the spirit of Jesus, which is the Christ, or the spirit of the Buddha, like the actual consciousness that expressed in, as, and through the historical Buddha, that consciousness is what you are invoking. That consciousness is descending, is coming forth in you every time you say Maranatha. Or if you're more familiar with the life of Jesus, this incredible expression of deep wisdom and profound love, tenderness with suffering, self sacrificing life in service to others. That consciousness that inhabited Jesus and operated in and through him, that consciousness is what you are invoking when you say Maranatha into your own personality self. And feel how that higher consciousness shifts your experience. See how it relates to what it does with the energy of anxiety, for instance. See how it might be moving you into a greater depth, a greater stillness. Or how it may be asking you to look at certain of your patterns like self-judgment, self-criticism, self-punishment. By just inviting you to see how much love you are loved with. The higher self holds you with such profound, unspeakable love that as you feel that, the contrast between that and how you feel about yourself can't be missed. It's an invitation for you to look more deeply at that pattern and to allow your own higher nature, your own divine self, to penetrate deeply into these fear and shame-based patterns, to heal and release them once and for all, so that the light, this inner light at your core, who you are, can shine forth in your life. In your life and in your world. Maranatha. Maranatha opens the gate that seemingly separates the personality from its higher self. It's the glove asking the hand to come down into it, fill it, and use it. And this last very important step of shifting your identity, just as a choice, whether or not you feel worthy or any of that, just shifting your identity from the one who is invoking Maranatha, who struggles with anxiety or whatever it might be. You shift to what it is you're experiencing that has come as a result of the invocation. a greater quiet or peace or equanimity or inspiration or insight or awareness. I am what I'm invoking. Feel those qualities and identify as those. All right, take a nice deep breath. Feel the way the body is being supported by your chair or your couch. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Let the body move a bit. So, recognizing it's always kind of hard to communicate right after a meditation. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love for you to put them in the little chat box. I'm especially interested in uh, any clarification that you may need. I want you to have this practice to be able to take it with you after today and use it. So one of you said the last bit was the hardest. Certainly. That's the big leap, is for us to let go of our very tenacious belief that we are separate and inadequate and small and limited, and that we are the body, that we got about 80, 90 years and that's it. Whatever the belief is, it's difficult to shift into a higher realization. This is why, at least in my life, spiritual practices are so important. They give us a sense of what's possible. They free us for a moment from our everyday default consciousness, which is so completely body identified. And they give us a moment to experience who we are beyond the body, who we are at the level of consciousness. And when we experience that more and more and more, it becomes easier to begin to make that shift, to begin to believe, wait a minute, I am consciousness. That's what I am. Not this physical body. I love this physical body. I take care of this physical body. I maintenance it. I value it. It is my vehicle in this world, in this lifetime. So of course I love it and value it. It's not what I am. I draw a blank frequently as I am opening meditation. Do I go deeper into the blankness? For sure. For sure. But again, in this particular practice, we want to let the mantra be the guide, the energy of the mantra and what it's invoking be the guide. But it's very often what we want to do is just go more deeply into kind of what reveals itself to us. And sometimes that's discomfort, and we go more deeply into that because there's roots, there's something perhaps that maybe that's happened in its origin or whatever that needs to be seen and 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 brought love to and healed. And sometimes, as in this case, the blankness is an invitation or a gateway to the realization of ourself as pure consciousness, not as something, right? The autobiography of Ram Dass. Some of you know Ram Dass, that name, his books. His recent autobiography that came out last year, I believe, is called Becoming Nobody, which is just the opposite of what we're trying to do in this culture. We're always trying to become somebody, you know? So this blankness that you're discovering is this nobodiness, this great emptiness, as the Buddha called it, which is our true nature, of course. So let's talk about the different contexts. This is the personal context. Now, I invite you to try this in two ways on a personal level. I invite you to try it when something's up for you. Anxiety, reactivity, whatever it might be. When something's up for you, do the Maranatha practice and see what you find. I also invite you to practice this just as a morning meditation. And nothing in particular may be up for you, quotes, you know. So you just sit in your chair and you notice the nature of your experience and you begin to invoke your higher self into that experience. It's like an intimacy. In the Old Testament, there's a passage in the Psalm where in the Psalms where God says, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still and know that I am God. When I was a Christian pastor, I used to take refuge in that quote as I learned to meditate, because I had learned growing up that meditation, was of the devil and it was all bad. And but I had found it in my adulthood, in my early adulthood, to be extremely helpful. And that text, "Be still and know that I am God," was how I justified my meditation practice in those days when I needed to justify it. But the word "know" here is a very interesting word. It's an interesting Hebrew word, "be still and know that I am God." The word "know" is the same word in Genesis where it says Adam knew Eve and she conceived a son. Knew meaning intercourse. So this "know," be still and know that I am God, presupposes a very deep intimacy and oneness. Be still and know. So if you think of that, like in the morning, you're reciting Maranatha is an invitation to an intimate union with the divine, and not as like somebody out, like super entity God out there somewhere, but the divine that inhabits your being, that is already in your core, that is who you are at your essence. So that you would then use this as just an invitation to a growing union and communion with the divine self, with the divine presence. This is exactly what all mystics of every tradition have learned to do in some way, shape, or form, to invite this deep union and communion with the divine presence until they are utterly dissolved into it. What a beautiful thing. Maranatha. Let me read. I desire to be a more spiritual person. I don't know what that looks like. Beautiful. It's actually better to not know what that looks like. On the one hand, I say, beautiful, don't try to put some image together, because if you try to put an image together, then you'll be trying to shine an image rather than to discover who you are behind all images. And okay, so that said, we can look at some of the big, people, the Jesuses and the Krishnas and the Buddhas and so forth, who didn't put a front on. In fact, who all fronts had been taken off of, and then this inner light of just incredible wisdom and deep compassion and engagement in the world in a way that helped others just came naturally. That's another way to look at it. When memories of shame and embarrassment arise in meditation, is there a way to expel them for good? So that's a wonderful question. And expelling them is actually not what we're wanting to do. What I would want you to do is identify that feeling of embarrassment and shame and go through the Maranatha practice. Embody it, right? Inhabit it. I like the word inhabit, Again, as I've said, as you inhabit a house, you don't become the house, you enter it, you abide in it, you explore it, inhabit shame, and then invoke your higher self into it. It's like here you are in this mind state, this very painful, tenacious, deep pattern that we all have until we don't. Here you are exploring this, and now you're inviting your higher self down into it. It's like, come, Lord, right? That's what Maranatha means. Come, my higher self, my true nature, my Christ consciousness, come and show me what I need to see. Show me what I need to feel through. Show me what I need to heal in order for me to once and for all transcend, rise above, let go of this as meaning anything about me at all. That's the idea. So we're not using, I'm so glad that this question arose. We're not using this pattern, I'm sorry, this practice to simply be a lever we pull so that we can feel better. That is not what we're doing here. Can I please just underscore this? We're not using this as a tricky technique to just escape all discomfort. It's not what we're doing. We're invoking higher consciousness down into the suffering of humanity as it expresses in the lab of our own life. We're learning how to bring love to pain. We're learning how to bring love to unlove, to untruth, to everything in us that doesn't feel its connection to love. We're learning to bring love to that. We're learning to do that in our own life so that we can do that in the world, in our outer life. So it's very, very important for you to understand these very deep, tenacious, very painful states. Now you have a method to go into them and to invite love and divine wisdom into them and to grow in your understanding, to grow out of any sense of these being personal and personally yours and representing anything about you. They do not. You're the divine light. Shame means nothing about you. Your personality needs to learn this and get this at a very, very deep level. So we stay in it, we invoke higher consciousness into it through Maranatha, and then watch, participate in the transformation of those patterns over time. Something like shame isn't going to go away in one or two kind of sessions. We grow out of it. And love is the key. Love is the healer. Self-love heals shame. Self-love follows self-discovery. In other words, oh, I see that I am the soul. I see that I am this higher consciousness, right? They can bring in the shame I feel into and through me in order to work with it. Yes. And then release into the vastness of what I truly am in order to dissipate the shame for good. Yes. Yes, that's a beautiful way to think of it. Think of it, though, as being accomplished through your higher self, not your personality. The personality can't do any of this because the personality is only a glove. The glove without the hand can't do a thing. Have you noticed? You can't look at the glove and say, go out and clip roses in the garden for me. The glove can't do that. The glove can only do what it does because it has the hand in it. The personality can't do any of this. The higher self does it all. The soul, the higher consciousness does it all through participation with, through collaboration with the personality. So through the Maranatha practice, we learn to collaborate with the higher self by inviting and invoking it into every aspect of our experience, every one. And then we'll have experiences that this last paragraph represented. or we'll feel the vastness open up, and the tight contracted nature of this shame energy or this anxiety energy kind of drift out into the vastness and dissipate. That's just one way, of course, of experiencing it. Just dissipate. And what we're left with is the vast open heart space. Ah, Soham. That's what I am. Okay, now I have to quickly, because we're running out of time, just talk for a moment about the use of the Maranatha practice in the interpersonal and the transpersonal contexts. So we've been talking about the personal context, and that's what I invite you to work with. What is the interpersonal context? It's every relationship and relationship interaction you have with your spouse, with your children, with your boss, with your employees, with your neighbors, with the person checking you out at Rayleigh's. Oh, you're not doing that now, you're sheltering at home. With any of those contexts, with anybody, with your dog, with your, right, anybody you know, with your family and friends and neighbors and anybody that you're interacting with, that is your interpersonal context. And in that context, you can use, and I invite you to experiment using the Maranatha practice. So for instance, say you had a little struggle with your spouse. And as you're sitting there, you feel the discomfort of the distance that the tension has created. And you go through the steps of the Maranatha practice. You embody that sense of tension and conflict, and you invoke a higher self through Maranatha. But not just for you, but also for your partner. So now you're using the word Maranatha on behalf of yourself and your partner. And you think and have the intention of the higher self being brought down or coming forth in both of you simultaneously and into the relationship dynamic, right? So in a relationship, there's three things. There's my stuff and my wife's stuff, and then the dynamic of the relationship kind of patterns that we have between us. We're inviting divine love and wisdom and grace and healing into all three of those when we say Maranatha. We're wanting harmony and peace and love and ways of healing conflict to be made known to both of us. And so we say Maranatha to bring all that, quotes, down from higher consciousness into our felt experience, into the nature of our interactions with each other. You can do it with somebody you love. It doesn't have to be somebody you're with right away. It's like you could do it with a daughter who lives in Southern California, and you think of that daughter and your love for her, and you say Maranatha on her behalf, on your behalf, on your relationship's behalf. It can be someone that you're interacting with. I do this all the time when I'm on a call with clients. I've been doing it with all of you during this session, where together in this interaction, we invoke Maranatha down into our relationship. The relationship is something bigger than just me. And through this practice, we begin to understand, actually, I am much more than just what's going on in this body. I am also what's going on in this relationship. That too is me, a larger sense of me. And I am invoking love and light and peace and harmony into this larger sense of me. I hope that's making sense to you. Same thing with the transpersonal. So in the transpersonal, we get into contexts that we're not involved in. I like to walk through my neighborhood. And as I'm walking through my neighborhood, I say Maranatha. And it's an intention for divine light and harmony and peace and love to be brought into the experience of the entire neighborhood. Now, I may not know these people. As I'm walking around different parts of my neighbor, I don't know these people. I'm invoking the light of divine consciousness to come forth in their lives and in this atmosphere, in the neighborhood as a whole, in the community as a whole. right? There is no limit to what you can apply this to. It's not something you have to actually be engaged in or be present in. You can be watching the news and seeing a place of real unrest, rioting, or a shooting that's taken place, and there's all kinds of heartache and frustration and anger. And you feel into that because you aren't separate from that. Your body might be in Chico or wherever you live, and that might be in Minnesota or it might be in Timbuktu, but you are connected to that. You can feel into that. If you feel into that, if you let a larger sense of consciousness feel into that, you're going to feel the pain there, the anxiety there, the frustrations there. And you call higher consciousness, you call divine consciousness, divine presence into that by saying Maranatha uh, in that context. But it's very important when you're using the interpersonal and the transpersonal that you let yourself feel the nature of what's being experienced there. You let yourself expand out beyond what you think of as your personal experience into the transpersonal experience. Like, really, if I'm there in Minneapolis, what is it that I'm experiencing? And right away you'll feel the spikes in your heart and the anger and the frustration and the sadness and the deep, and all of that will be, it could be very troubling at a personal level, but you're doing this for a reason. You're there to call down divine love and harmony and power to heal into that context. We're out of time. Can you stay with me for just 2 minutes? And let's just do a quick practice of the interpersonal and the transpersonal, because I want you to experience it. It's probably going to take 5 minutes. If you need to log off, I certainly understand that. Take a nice deep breath, close your eyes. Think of some relationship. It can be a relationship that is really going well and you like, or it can be kind of a troubled relationship. Whichever one you choose, feel what you feel when you think of that relationship. Feel the love and harmony, feel the tension, the dissent, the frustration, the way your energies have kind of withdrawn from that. And now into that experience, say Maranatha. Have the sense of a descending light into that relational context, into you, into that other, and into the dynamic that's taking place between you in that moment. Love descending, harmony descending, healing grace descending and coming forth in you, in the other, and in the relational dynamic between the two. Maranatha. Now, shifting to the transpersonal, imagine yourself to connect with a place on the planet that's currently troubled that you know about. Something, a place that you're not a part of it, you're not in it. Or you could even do it just for like a cause. Think of, for instance, the injustice and inequality that still exists in the world. And again, you must allow yourself to feel the reality of that situation. The angst and the sadness, the hopelessness and despair, the anger, the defensiveness. And into that energy, you say, Maranatha. You might be visualizing a scene that you saw on TV or on the internet of seeming hatred and violence. Maranatha. Invoking divine grace into that situation and into the lives of all people involved. Divine light, love, harmony, peace, forgiveness, deep healing, deep understanding, empathy, compassion. Invoking these qualities every time you say Maranatha. And feel that in some way this situation, this scenario is an extension of you. It is part of you, and you it. You aren't separate from it. How this situation unfolds matters to your well-being. You feel it to be a part of a larger sense of self, a sense of self that goes far beyond the boundaries of your personal self. And as wide as that awareness can stretch, and as much as that awareness can include, into that you say, Maranatha. Come higher consciousness. Come Christ consciousness. Come Buddha nature. Come descending light of spirit. And just one last moment. Just feel your connection to the world. It just might be too big. The brain just like can't stretch that much, but your heart can. Your connection to all beings, human and otherwise, all expressions of life on the planet. Maranatha. So we end with the Bodhisattva prayer. You can repeat after me. It's on your screen. May all beings be happy and free. May all beings be safe and well. May all beings awaken to their true nature. May all beings live together in peace and harmony. May all beings be happy and free. May all beings be safe and well. May all beings awaken to their true nature. May all beings live together in peace and harmony. Maranatha. 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 All right, my friends. It's been so great to be with you here today. Thank you for sharing this Sunday. Thank you for clicking on this link if you're watching this on YouTube later on. So blessed to have you participate. Thank you all for your questions and your comments. And just to let you know, in case you're interested, next Wednesday, I'm going to be continuing on with the Maranatha practice. And we'll be doing this on Zoom, which means there'll be opportunity for actually words exchanged, not just written words, but spoken words. So if you're inclined to do this, practice this between now and Wednesday evening, and then join us on Wednesday evening and share your experience. Ask questions that will be rooted in your practice. And I look forward to exploring this together with you again on Wednesday. All right. Much love. God bless. Namaste.